Hey guys, welcome back to the Results Junkies podcast. We're going to pick up where we left off last week talking about China and AI, Alibaba and Tencent specifically. Then we're going to talk a little bit about Google and Gemini and how they're pricing it for the workspace. Mr. Singh, how the heck are you?
I am good, man. I am good. It seems like I've been juggling more chainsaws than usual this week, but still have all my fingers and my toes and a couple days left until we get to the weekend, so we'll just see. So how about you?
We're still going to wait to talk about that other thing, right?
We're gonna,
Okay.
I'll have a date for you by next week, and then we'll talk about that other thing that shall not be named.
Oh, it'll be named, just not now.
That's right. That's right. Yes.
Yeah, I'm doing good. Just super busy. It seems like the deluge is not slowing down anytime soon. So a quick bit of housekeeping. Show at resultsjunkies.com is how you find us. You shoot us an email or leave us a comment. He's at Paul Singh on all of those social media channels. I am at Pizza in Motion. Also, love it if you got just a minute to do a couple things for us. If you're watching, like the video, subscribe, and then on audio platforms, if you could like as well and leave us a review or a rating. That's super helpful for us to spread the show. So let's get into this Alibaba and Tencent thing, and I'll tee it up and let's take first crack at it here. So essentially, we've talked about AI in not in the U.S., but U.S.-based companies and how there's this rush to buy up, NVIDIA chips as quickly as possible, H100 to buy the truckload, and then leverage that into whatever the next play is. But it's a sort of a different sort of ecosystem than we may have seen in the past. And, we've got an article here that we'll include a link to in the show notes from the Wall Street Journal about how that over the past year or so, that Alibaba and Tencent have been really focused on acquiring AI startups in China. 40% of Alibaba's deals over the past year and 30% of Tencent's deals have targeted AI startups. So I'll stop there for a second to get your opinion, and I have a few on some of the details in the article.
Well, I think it just goes to show you that it's that important. I would think you would. Well, I'll just say this. Everybody's asking what the AI strategy is now. And I will admit, and this is for every company, it's like everybody's asking where that fits. And, I admit that probably the majority of those questions are super naive and probably super irrelevant. Like, if you're I'll just use our friend, our mutual friend and portfolio company, Julian at PointsPath. Like, I don't think he should be thinking about AI strategy right now. I mean, he's, I don't think this is a secret, but I'll just say, like, his strategy over the next year really is just user acquisition. He's in the high 5 figures. We need to cross 6 figures. Like, it's land grab right now for him. So anyway, the point is like AI strategy, I think, is being talked about everywhere. But I think what we're seeing with these larger companies in the US here and with this article overseas just shows you how high the stakes are for the big companies. But let me allude to that and let you set this up.
Yeah, for sure. I have thoughts on the Julian thing, and then I have thoughts on Alibaba and Tencent. First off, I'd say, like, looking at the Alibaba and Tencent piece, couple of things. First off, I dug in a little bit more on some of these deals, and I found a couple of things. First off, I was surprised, at least in the deals that I could find, very few of them were stock deals. I would have expected that more of them would have been for shares of Alibaba and Tencent as opposed to using cash. And we talked a bit about this just in terms of, like, the overall philosophy of, the Googles of the world, the Amazons of the world, like they're chewing up real estate and sucking all the oxygen out of the network so that they can be kingmakers further down the road. And I can't quite tell if Alibaba and Tencent are just further down that same path or if they're taking a different path, because, as the Wall Street Journal article quotes, and I'll preface this briefly, Alibaba invested $800 million for a 36% share in a Chinese company called Moonshot AI. Of that 800 million, 300 million of it was in the form of credits to use on Alibaba's cloud computing infrastructure, which is essentially revenue for them. So they put $500 million into this company in some form of cash that wasn't credits to use on Alibaba's site. And Alibaba bought, is in the H100 game. There's also another unicorn startup that bought several hundred H1 chips. So, like, I think what's potentially different here and or further along in the curve is that Alibaba and Tencent are already picking kings, if you will. I mean, set aside the use of the H100s, which we've said is for companies like Google and stuff, almost making them gatekeepers. on top of Alibaba and Tencent seeming to use a similar strategy for their H100s, they also put $500 million into an AI startup. And that's
Yeah.
a massive amount of money. So that's the business side of things. And then on the China side of things, on your comments about Julian, the only thing I'd say, and Julian's got a small team, I saw something the other day that just made me think about how he might apply AI in a way that's probably not labor intensive, but I'm not a coder. So I think you and I have talked on the pod at some point about the app Flighty. Do you remember that?
Yep. Yeah. I mean, I don't pay for it, but I still have it on my phone. You showed it to me. It's super amazing, especially for a solo developer, I think is what you told me, right?
Yeah, I think it's 2 total people, but it's a very small team. It's mostly bootstrap. It's all bootstrap. So it's just like as they get cash in, they use it to invest in features or when they have spare time. They added something interesting, which I thought was a really helpful use of AI. And I think you could almost call it machine learning as opposed to AI. But so like, right now it says, hey, like your flight is due to depart at 4:15 and it's due to arrive at, 7:22. Well, they're pulling that information from ATC information, air traffic control, and then whatever the airline's publishing and all that. But what they've now started to do, I should have taken a screenshot of this and put it up on the screen, but what they're now starting to do is say, hey, our AI says that even though your flight's scheduled to land at 7:22, we think you're going to land at 7:46. And, that based on a number of factors. But I mean, typically like the one that I had last week it was very clear that when a United plane was running late, they weren't going to be, United had it scheduled that they were going to turn that plane in 5 minutes. So it was going to land, and 5 minutes later, it was going to take off with a full passenger load full of people, which you and I both know is never going to happen. So Flighty was using logic to say, you know what? We don't think that this is your accurate departure time. We think your accurate departure time is going to be, call it 40 minutes later than that. And I thought about this from the Julian concept of, depending on what the cost was to do this, he's got the overlay on Google Flights. He could use some level of machine learning or AI to say, you know what, this is the price per miles today, and this is the, price for cash. And based on information we've seen in the past and what we think is happening over the next 6 months, this is what we think is going to happen with your price. And there's some people that are already doing that now on the cash side of things, but really not on the point side. So I did think about that as a potential concept where AI or machine learning could help him. I just don't know what the cost is and from a bandwidth standpoint. I don't disagree that it's a land grab for sure for him. I'm just thinking of, for some people, just knowing how many points something costs may not be the thing that's most interesting to them. They may want more and they might be willing to pay for more. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think maybe I would the only response I would say to that is like, I definitely agree with you that, look, these features like that, what you just described, are useful to someone somewhere. And so we're going to see more and more of that. I don't think this is a question of if we're going to see more generative AI sort of utility come up. I think it's just a matter of when. And as it relates to these big companies, back to one of the things I think you were kind of talking about there is that I think when this whole wave first started, I think you had a lot of large companies that had a lot of compute, and compute cycles were pretty rare.
Right.
NVIDIA was still trying to figure out how to like ship these things out, by the container full back to the buyers. At one point, I believe as recently as last year, purchases were still a year out from delivery. You would buy 30,000 chips or GPUs, and it might be a year before you get them. So I think early on, when very few large companies had most of the compute power, they could leverage that in negotiations with these startups to provide credits of compute as opposed to hard dollars. I think now we're a year ahead, and I think the latest NVIDIA earnings report is still showing revenue growth, but they, I believe, are also showing that their overall time to deliver is much faster now. Like I think, if I remember right, they're for the biggest orders, I think they're still within a quarter or two between when it was ordered and when it gets delivered. So the point is, it implies that compute is now more widely available. And so for these large corporations to be competitive, differentiating on just credits is a lot harder now because somebody somewhere else at another big company is willing to pile drive loads of money and cash. So anyway, the point is, I think it's just getting a lot more competitive now, and that's why you're seeing these big dollars. So for example, that you gave that one example, I think Alibaba investing $800 million into that one company. I don't even know who that company is, but I would bet money that it wasn't, it wasn't generating $800 million worth of value. It was the competitive investment market that drove that value up. For better or for worse, that's just kind of, I bet, what happened. And again, I'm not dinging those companies or anything like that. But the point is, though, is that like it. I think the fact is that because the dollars are moving in the way that they are right now, that just goes to show you how competitive this is and how strategically important it is. Sorry, I'm going on and on, but one other thing, by the way, I think it's important to remember, by the way, that this is my recollection. Some of the earliest acquisitions we saw at 500 startups back in 2010, 11, 12, that sort of thing. As I recall, some of the earliest acquisitions we saw were acqui-hires, where, companies like Google were paying 2x valuation and big signing bonuses to get these small teams of 5 or 10 to join the big company. And it wasn't, I guess the headline, the catchy, clickbait headline would be like, Google scoops them up and takes another competitor out. My recollection, as I was talking to some of the corporate dev people at some of these larger companies that were buying ours, Google, LinkedIn, and all that.
Yeah.
My recollection of those conversations 12, 13, 14 years ago was it was really more about talent. These people that were at the edge at the time, these people that were at the edge of things like OCR and productizing optical character recognition and things like that. Those were the kind of people that, these large companies needed to or wanted to have on their engineering and product teams. But because people like us were funding them early on, they had no choice but to buy them. So anyway, I think that's also kind of interesting to me too here that maybe we're starting to see that on the AI side too. It's like, by investing into these companies, they're getting sort of optionality. But we'll see. TLDR, the investing strategy of corporates into AI startups in 2024 looks a lot like what was kind of happening in the US here with like the Googles and the LinkedIns and stuff like that with early stage, tech companies at the time. So here we go. This is two old dudes talking in our basements about how history always repeats itself.
Speak for yourself. I'm on the first floor. I
talked to my wife about that.
Right? Yeah. To your point, just to sew this piece up, and then we can move on to our next topic. I think you talked about the chips, and I think it's interesting. Like you said, deliveries are speeding up. I also think what was interesting, and for clarity, I'm long NVIDIA. I own their stock. So I also recall from the article, I think the current chip is called Hopper. Not only are deliveries happening quicker, but deliveries are the number of chips they expect to deliver next quarter of that version of chip is increasing. And then their next generation chip, which I can't remember the name of, it's like Black Hawk or something like that. That next generation of chip they expect to ship next quarter. So what's interesting to me about that is, even though people know that there's a new, faster chip coming, more efficient chip coming, the number of orders for the existing chipset is increasing, which tells me that the rest of the competition is far behind on production and how much they have. So let's move on from there and talk about Gemini, which, I'll tee up this article and then I've got one clarifying point, and then I want to get your thoughts on it. So essentially what we're looking at here now is that Google has rolled out essentially an add-on of Gemini where Gmail users only on Android for the moment can chat with Gemini about their emails. And so like the example that they use in this article, it says, Google says you can ask Gemini to summarize emails by stating things like, catch me up on the emails about quarterly planning, or how much did the company spend on the last marketing event? What I think is just one other interesting fact to add, I'm almost positive of this, and I can't confirm it, but I thought when you and I talked about Gemini and an add-on for email the last time, which was probably a couple months ago, that it was part of some of the Google Workspace packages as you moved up in price. And now when I look at the Google site, it appears that those are all add-ons. So you pay for your Google Workspace, and then you pay on top of that for Gemini Business or Gemini Enterprise. So they've segregated the pricing a bit more on the Gemini model. So I'll stop there and leave it to you.
I don't get it. I really don't get it. I mean, if the goal here with the productization and the consumerization of these generative AI tools is to get widespread adoption and widespread usage and all that. I don't get the point of putting a paywall in front of it. I think in the early days, I think it was really more compute limited, but we're talking about Google here. I mean, we're not, you know, and I think, I don't know how to articulate this, but the other thing is, and I'll just speak for myself as just one person, just as a normal consumer, you know, one of the mental hurdles I got to get over is that, for example, in our house, we've got a bunch of these Alexa devices throughout the house, right? And the promise of this device when we first started getting these things years ago was that, it'd be your assistant and it'd do all these things. Turns out years later, the utility of it is essentially setting timers. My kids play fart sounds on it, and that's it. So I know it's not the same. I know it's not generative AI, but my point is, I think is as a normal consumer, and I think I'm pretty tech savvy, like I think I'm pretty forward thinking, but even yet, I have this mental block where I'm like, oh, the idea of paying $10 more for this, like, this generative assistant that is promised the world, like it's a mental hurdle. And if somebody like me has that level of hesitation, what does that say about a more average consumer that doesn't spend, their day thinking about technology? So that's the part I don't get. Now, the other side of this, though, is I think it's going to be very fascinating to see what Apple does with iOS 18. And I promise we'll come back to this Gemini thing here in a second. Apple might surprise us with their upcoming announcement and say, by the way, you're going to have to pay more money for it. I don't know. But the point is, though, is that like in the past, Apple, I think, given their widespread, customer base of people with MacBooks and iPhones and iPads and all these other things, how they productize generative AI, I think, is going to tell us what consumers are going to do, and really, I think, set the expectation for consumers on what generative AI can do. So I think within the next few months here, I mean, we're recording this it's early September now almost. So it's like, I think within the next 90 days, maybe 180 days tops is when we're going to see the iOS, I think 18.1 that's going to have the initial features here.
Right.
They might totally flop. I mean, they're not perfect. I mean, they screwed up the first version of Apple Maps, right? But at the same time,
versions.
well, yeah, but they'll figure it out. But back to this Gemini thing, I do think there's value in being like, my inbox has got years of emails in it. I think there's some value, I'm sure, being able to just talk to it. So like just yesterday, for example, I was trying, I was like, oh, I thought I saw a name that I recognized. I wanted to check my email to see if that last name had ever emailed me.
Mm.
And, so I found myself messing around with like the search, it's like from : or name includes. I was trying, and I ended up Googling advanced search features for Gmail to try to figure out what the right combination of operators was to figure it out. And it took me longer than it should have to figure this out. So I could see a value of being able to talk to the prompt or write in the prompt, has anybody with the last name X ever emailed me? I could see value in that. Is it worth $10 a month? That's where you got to sell me on this a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely see that there's going to be different use cases on whether this is valuable. I think, we talked about this a few weeks ago, but I still come back to, and to your point, I don't know what the Apple model is going to be, but I still come back to, I think there's value in a small language model that's built around my information to be able to say, the example I think we used in the past was, remind me when my mom is going to Hawaii. And it's like, okay, well, it knows who my mom is. It knows when, it knows where Hawaii is. It knows how to pull a date from the email. And so, could I search from mom's email address space Hawaii and get the information? I sure could. If I could just type in a prompt, when is my mom going to Hawaii? And it just returns, June 29th, that saves me time. Can it save me $20 a month? I mean, those are all the questions we have to ask. I think just to make you nauseous, right now I have 484,000 unread emails in my Gmail. So there's a lot of data there, and a lot of it's, data I don't need access to at the moment. But, I'll give an example from a business standpoint. Let's just say I was getting ready to sit down with the general manager of one of my restaurants, and, food safety is a big part of, obviously what we do. And, what if I was able to just quickly say to Gemini, hey, tell me what the average of all of the food safety audits was at store 1233 over the past 12 months. And if Gemini could serve that information up based on my emails in, 10 or 15 seconds before sitting down in front of someone, that saves me a lot of time. I'm not saying the models are there yet, to be clear. That's what I would pay for. I would pay for Gemini being able to take if-then statements and turn them into quick data answers such that I didn't need to research and build a table. So that's where I potentially see the value in this. What I struggle with is how do you price it? So I haven't dug deeply in the pricing because if we want it for our group, we have to talk to an enterprise salesperson. But I mean, we've got something like 30 Gmail licenses. So am I going to pay $600 a month? $20 a month by the license? You're like, what's my enterprise price? So like, I'm willing to pay $20 for me. I'm not willing to pay $20 for everybody who works for me because they're not all going to get that value. So it remains to be seen what the model will price out on this. I'd say the last point I would make in terms of how maybe I differ in opinion from you is you mentioned about how you're surprised you're not making this more widely available without charging. I'll be honest. I think, Google has always, well, not always, but they've frequently made a habit out of, building for, whatever comes next, trying to grab market share or doing things that, may help them further down the road. I mean, just the whole thought of creating the Android operating system as a blocking tactic, was really about long-term strategy. In this case, I don't really have a problem with them testing monetization path earlier because I'm not sure, just like you and I have struggled with like, well, what would I pay and how many people would I pay for and all those sorts of things. I still think we're really trying to figure that out. And I don't have a problem with them testing that earlier than they have with other products.
Yep. I mean, I think, well, see, I don't know how to ask the question here. Like, okay, so let me throw you a curveball. I'm actually kind of curious. Based on what you know so far, what do you think? So let's just say if we had a magic ball and we fast forward to 1 year from today, what do you think our day-to-day interaction as dads, professionals, whatever, how do you think our day-to-day interaction is going to look like with these generative AI tools?
I think they're going to be somewhere in between being truly productive and being the, alarm that you set on your Alexa device. I still think within a year, I still think we're still fully optimized on these sort of products, especially if you talk about on the personal side of things. I think on the business side of things, they could be more valuable. On the personal side, I mean, certainly, they could remind me about birthdays or tell me to bring my wife flowers or things like that. But there's already tools that do those things. So those parts aren't necessarily new. They might just be other ways I try to like justify the subscription. So I think from a personal standpoint, it's harder to see that value. On a business side, I see it more over the next year as they start to accelerate, only because I think just generally speaking, you and I have a larger language model of work emails than we do personal emails. So I
agree. Yeah.
That's the side of that I see. Again, I still really struggle with the pricing model and what makes sense for folks. I mean, think about it this way, and I could be wrong about this. We converted to Gmail probably a little over 2 years ago, and it was
something like that. Yeah.
Our Exchange server literally fell over with rack space. Like they had just a massive meltdown. We talked about it on the show. I don't think there are there are people who are converting to the Google and the Gmail platform, but I don't think they're doing it in massive amounts. And I think with the entrenched complications of a Exchange server, if you're already on one, I don't think you're going to switch if Google gets 5% better. So adding some level of AI to these products and saying, we hope that this will attract more new users, I don't think that's an effective monetization strategy for Google with AI. So to some degree, I think starting with this model of saying, what if we could get more money out of our existing customers? I mean, I don't hate that approach.
I don't disagree with you. I mean, I think I would bet, I'm hopeful anyways, that, okay, so I have this theory that like, right now, when I look around at some of the kids in our neighborhood, they're, the teens or whatever that are walking by the house after, to and from the bus stop, they're all wearing their AirPods, and I would bet that the vast majority of what they're listening to is music or they're playing games or whatever. But if I had to guess like a year from now, I wouldn't be surprised if I see them actually just talking every once in a while. In other words, what I mean is I bet within a year, we're going to see some interesting consumerization of these generative AI models such that you can maybe converse a little bit better with your device and get it to do stuff. Like, I'll give you an example. we have this Chevy Suburban we use to move our kids around, right? And this is going to sound like such a first world problem, but it's like here in Virginia, the summers are extremely hot, the
Yeah.
winters are annoyingly cold. And so I like the auto start feature on our car,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
get the car ready. But right now, it requires me to go open the My Chevy app on my phone or find the app on my watch, and then you have to click the button. It's like I know it's a first world problem. It's not that big of a deal, but maybe in a year I'm able to just like without even stopping to do anything, I can just talk into this device and say, "Hey, start the car." And through the magic of APIs and generative AI and all that stuff, it just does it. Kind of like what you said there about like I would get more utility out of that today. Here's where I'm going with this, by the way. I think for people that are building or even thinking about building some sort of let me just use Julian. Poor Julian's always getting thrown under the bus here. Right now, so let's just say hypothetically that Julian was the prototypical startup founder. He's raised money.
Yep.
He's got a lot of users now. He's doing all these things. Obviously, he should keep going with what he's doing and focusing on growth. But on the off chance that maybe one of his engineers has some experience or interest in testing out generative AI things, I think the way I would think about this from a product roadmap standpoint is what is something that would provide routine utility to somebody? So,
Yeah.
for example, I can right now go on Google Flights and search for a city pair and then say track my flight or track this thing, and then it just sends you an email every once in a while that says prices are high, prices are low, or whatever. And
Right.
that kind of just puts it in my court whenever it's ready. But I wonder if there's like something that I would interact with more. And there's a guy, Andrew Chen I believe he's an investor over at Sequoia, and we even co-invested in companies like AppSumo and stuff like that. And Andrew, I think in one of his articles really talked about this idea years ago in one of his articles where he talked about this idea of like, if you're building for consumers or if consumers in any way touch your product, you've got to think about the most repetitive part and how do you make that like a wow moment more
Yeah.
often. If I was sitting here listening to this right now and I was a founder or a CEO or whatever, thinking about how generative AI is going to play into my strategy, I would be very careful of statements like, wouldn't it be cool if? And instead, I would focus on what are the most repetitive touch points that your customers or your users have with your product? And can generative AI provide even more delight in those moments? Because if that's the case, you could, in theory, make a product that's even stickier, provides even more value to your customers, and then you get to go deeper in with AI. Conversely, it's kind of like, if you ended up building generative AI and it does this like cool thing that nobody ever sees behind the scenes, like, does it even matter? I mean, it's not, I don't know. It's maybe I'll be able to sharpen my thoughts on this over the next couple of weeks here, because it is a bigger conversation here at Strata too. So
Yeah.
we'll
Yeah.
see. But compute is no longer the limiting factor. That's the key. Like that's the biggest difference between this year and last year is like, I can get it anywhere.
Yeah.
AWS, Google, other providers, I can get it anywhere. Now it's just a matter of like, what do we want to do? So
Yeah.
we'll see.
No, that's fair. All right. Well, I think that's probably a good place to pin it for the week, man.
Yeah, man. I think it's a good one. You going anywhere fun over the next couple of days?
Going down to visit our daughter for the weekend, Labor Day weekend, to say hi. And then, oddly enough, I don't get on a plane for like another 10 days.
Well, I think I won't give away your secrets, but I would say I'm very interested to see your stress levels over the next few months as you think about construction and the Venn diagram of construction and burgers.
Yeah. 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 Oh, man.
So,
All right. Well,
all right, man. We'll have a fun weekend down there. It's not football season down there yet, right? Or
it is, but they're away this weekend. So the parents' weekend in 2 weeks is when there's supposed to be games. We don't have tickets for the game. I don't have a problem with college football. I enjoy it. I just don't have a team that I root for. Oddly enough, the culinary school I went to wasn't real big into college football. But I also don't know that we're going to try and tackle the 65,000 people cramming into a stadium down there in Blacksburg for a game just yet.
If you want to see some incredible sales skills, drop that statement into the text chain with Dana. And very quickly, you will see her ability to sell you on her favorite football team, which is the Tennessee Volunteers. Which, by the way, are playing tomorrow. It's a big thing. We got fog machines, lights, all sorts of crazy stuff.
totally get it. And here's the thing. If you'll remember, I went to a Tennessee Volunteers game with you when we were on the tech tour. And that was unique to me in that it was a massive stadium, whatever the capacity is in Tennessee. And they were playing either Georgia or Florida. They were.
It was Florida, I believe.
It was a big rivalry. No. It was a big rivalry game. So, like, like you tell me that I can go see a tech game with a big rivalry. Like, I might be into that.
Yeah.
But the appeal of going and seeing one of the largest stadiums in the world was definitely pretty cool. I'm not anti-college football for sure. I'm just not as big a fan of it to say I want to deal with whatever it's like to get 65,000 people into one stadium all at once. So,
okay, says the guy that would gladly spend his days at Disney with millions of other people. But okay,
because I can spend money to hit a button and I get in quickly.
Okay, so college football teams need an app. Is that it?
No, I just need a way that I can just give them some small amount of money and cut to the front of the line. Not a big amount of money, because I know there's a big amount of money cut to the line. But I don't want to. Standing in line for this isn't just college football. I wouldn't stand in line to get for 2 hours to get into a Giants game. As much as I love my New York Giants, it's just the experience is so good on TV. They've used technology to make football on TV excellent to the point that it's like, wow, do I really want to sit for 2 hours in traffic both ways? Getting into the stadium to drive 1.5 miles to cram myself into a stadium, it looks great on my TV.
I love it. All right. Well, now that you've pissed off college football fans,
done.
We'll leave it there.
All 3 of them that are listening.
All right, man. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, man. You too.
See ya.